Before we dive deeper into Harriet's breaking point, I want to speak directly to anyone watching who has ever felt pressured, doubted, or treated like their only role was to hand over their independence, their savings, or their home. Let me remind you, you are not powerless, and it is never too late to stand firm. You can still say no, and you can still choose yourself without shame. And to help you take that first step, we're giving away, for a limited time only, our best-selling audiobook, Healthy Boundaries. After 60, How to Set Strong Boundaries, Say No with Grace, Protect Your Peace and Strengthen Your Relationships with Your Children. It's completely free right now, but only for a short while. Don't miss this chance. Grab it from the pinned comment before it's gone. And if this speaks to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories of women who chose dignity over pressure. Because what happens when Harriet finally refuses to be treated like property is something you won't want to miss. At the bank, my son slid a pen across the desk toward me. His hand was steady, almost casual, but I could feel the pressure behind it. "Just sign it, Mom," Gregory said, his voice soft but firm, like this was all perfectly normal. Judith, my daughter-in-law, was standing just behind me. She leaned down close enough for me to smell her perfume. Her hand rested on my shoulder, heavy and insistent, her smile so wide it looked painted on. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like comfort. To me, it felt like a warning. The bank office was quiet except for the faint hum of the air vent. A neat stack of papers sat in front of me. The title printed across the top was full of legal words I didn't recognize right away, but I knew enough to understand what they were trying to do. It wasn't help. It was control. Gregory tapped the pen against the paper as though he was losing patience. "Mum, this is just to make things easier. You're making it harder than it needs to be." I nodded slowly, pretending to go along, but inside my chest my heart pounded like it was trying to break free. I wasn't confused. I wasn't frail. I wasn't about to hand over everything I had worked for just because my son and his wife told me to. Judith squeezed my shoulder tighter. "It's for your own good, Harriet. We're looking out for you. Don't you trust us?" Trust. That word felt heavy in the air, heavier than the pen in my hand. For 68 years I'd managed my own life just fine. I'd paid every bill, signed every check, handled every problem that came my way. But now, sitting in this small office, I felt like they were trying to erase all of that history in one quick stroke of a pen. The bank manager, Mr. Patel, sat across from us. He wore a polite expression, the kind bankers use when they've seen too many families argue over money. His hands folded neatly on his desk, waiting. I looked down at the pen, then at the papers, then back up at Gregory. My son's eyes met mine, and for a second, I thought I saw the boy I raised, the one who used to sit at my kitchen table doing math homework while I cooked dinner. But that softness was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. All I saw now was determination, sharp and cold. I forced my hand to move, not toward the papers, but toward the small slip of paper I had hidden in my purse. I had written it at home that morning just in case. My fingers trembled only a little as I slid it across the desk to Mr. Patel, tucking it between the folders. He glanced down and his expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered for just a second. He lifted the note with care, like it was part of the routine, and read the words I had scribbled in block letters. "Help, not my choice." The moment stretched long. Judith's grip tightened. Gregory leaned back in his chair, tapping the table with his finger. Mr. Patel folded the note, slipped it under a file, and then, without a word, reached over to the office door. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the small room, louder than it should have been. Gregory frowned. "What's going on?" Mr. Patel gave a calm smile. "Just a standard step, sir. Some verifications require privacy." I let out the smallest breath of relief, but I kept my face steady, not giving away anything. I couldn't afford to. Not yet. If you're watching this, you might be wondering how a woman like me, someone who has lived a long, steady life, someone who raised children, someone who has always been careful with money, ended up passing desperate notes to a bank manager. Believe me, 3 months ago, I would have wondered the same thing. But that was before the visits, before the phone calls, before the quiet little tricks that made me doubt myself. I never imagined my own son would be the one pressing me into this corner. I never imagined the girl he married would stand behind me with her hand on my shoulder, urging me to give them the keys to my life. Yet here I was, Harriet Evans of Richmond, Virginia, 68 years old, widowed, sitting in a bank office with papers that could wipe away every bit of independence I had left. I looked at Gregory, then at Judith, then at the locked door. I told myself, stay calm. Don't let them see fear. Don't give them what they want. Because this was more than just money. This was about my name, my house, my freedom. And I wasn't ready to give those away. Not today. Not ever. That's how it started. The day I slipped that note across the desk was the day everything changed. My name is Harriet Evans. I'm 68 years old, and for the past 5 years I've lived alone in a little brick house on the east side of Richmond, Virginia. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a porch where I sit in the evenings with a cup of tea. My husband Thomas and I bought it when Gregory was a teenager. After Thomas passed, the house felt too quiet, but I've held on to it because it's mine. It's where I built my life, and I wasn't ready to let go of that. I've kept busy, even as the years rolled on. My mornings usually start with my garden. Roses along the fence, tomatoes in raised beds, and a few herbs in pots by the back steps. Neighbours walking by often stop to ask me about soil or watering, and I always enjoy those short chats. Gardening gives me purpose. It reminds me that with a little care, life continues to grow, even after loss. On Sundays, I go to church, not just for the service, but for the people. Some of the women there I've known for over 30 years. We share potluck meals, swap recipes, and pray for one another's children and grandchildren. I find peace in those gatherings. It's good to sit among people who don't expect anything from me except friendship. During the week, I help out at the food pantry downtown. I started volunteering there after Thomas died, thinking it would distract me from the empty house. Over time, it became part of who I am. Stocking shelves, greeting families, handing out bags of food. It may not sound glamorous, but it keeps me connected to the world outside my front door. And I'll tell you something. When you've watched a mother's shoulders relax because you placed bread and milk in her hands, you realise how small acts can mean everything. For a long time, I thought my life had settled into a steady rhythm. Quiet days, small joys, predictable routines. Gregory would call every week or two, and sometimes we'd meet for lunch. Those lunches meant a lot to me. I used to think we were still close, even though he was grown and busy with his own family. But things started changing after he married Judith. At first, I welcomed her with open arms. She was polite, smart, and always nicely put together. I thought she'd be good for Gregory. He seemed happy, and that was all I wanted. For the first couple of years, we got along well enough. She'd bring dessert to family dinners, ask me about recipes, and occasionally send flowers on Mother's Day. It felt genuine then. But slowly, the space between us grew wider. Gregory stopped calling as often. When he did call, Judith's voice was usually in the background, giving reminders or telling him to wrap it up. When I invited them over, she usually had an excuse. A school event, a work meeting, or she was just too tired. Sometimes I wondered if she was steering him away from me, but I told myself not to think that way. I didn't want to believe my son's wife could change the bond between a mother and her child. As the years went on, the difference became harder to ignore. Gregory used to confide in me about his job, his worries, even about his hopes for the future. After he married Judith, those talks stopped. Conversations turned shallow. He'd ask if I needed anything for the house or if I had enough money for bills, but it wasn't said in a caring way. It sounded more like he was keeping tabs. I brushed it off. I thought maybe he was just trying to act responsible, maybe even copying Judith's way of thinking. I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, they were raising children, paying a mortgage, handling the stresses of life. I told myself that marriage changes priorities. That's natural. Still, in my heart, I missed the Gregory I knew before, the one who would sit on the porch with me and talk about baseball games or what he wanted to do with his life. Now I need to say this clearly. I don't hate Judith. I never did. But I began to notice things in her that didn't sit right with me. She had a way of speaking sweetly, but meaning something else entirely. A compliment with an edge. A suggestion that was really a command. And when it came to Gregory, he seemed to listen to her more than to anyone else. Even me. Especially me. I thought I raised a good man. And maybe I did. But marriage can change people. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. In Gregory's case, it felt like the son I once knew was still there, but hidden, muffled by Judith's influence and by his own choices. For years, I tried to ignore the tension. I told myself to be patient, to give them space. Families go through seasons. Some years you're close, other years you drift apart. I hoped things would balance themselves out again. That Gregory would remember I was the one who cared for him when no one else was around. Looking back now, I realize I gave too much room for doubt. I excused little slights, brushed away the hints, told myself not to make trouble. But those small things were signs of a bigger problem brewing, because one day that distance turned into control, and control turned into pressure, and pressure nearly cost me everything. But at that point, before the trouble really started, I was just Harriet Evans, widow, mother, grandmother, gardener, church volunteer, living a quiet life in a small house in Richmond. I didn't know then that my own son and his wife would try to take that life away from me, piece by piece. It started small, almost too small to notice. Gregory began dropping by more often. At first, I thought it was nice. He'd show up with coffee or a bag of groceries and say, "Just thought you might need a hand, Mum." I welcomed the company. After all, a mother never stops enjoying time with her child, no matter how grown they are. But as the visits piled up, the tone shifted. Instead of catching up on life, he seemed more interested in my bills, my accounts, my house. "Mum, how are you handling the utilities?" he asked one evening, glancing at the stack of envelopes on my kitchen table. I told him the truth. "I've paid them on time, same as always." He frowned, tapping the corner of one envelope. "You know, online banking would be safer. Less chance you'll forget something." "I haven't forgotten in 40 years, I reminded him gently. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and looked around like he was taking mental notes. Then came the comments about the house. "This place is getting old, Mum. When was the last time you had the roof checked?" "I had a handyman out last year," I said. "He patched a few spots." Gregory shook his head, running his hand along the windowsill. "Things can sneak up on you. Houses like this take more than you realize." Judith started coming with him on these visits. She'd walk through the rooms, complimenting the curtains or the family photos, but her eyes always drifted to the corners where paint chipped, or to the steps leading to the porch. One Saturday, after looking around the kitchen, she set her purse on the counter and said, "Harriet, have you ever thought about downsizing?" "Downsizing?" I repeated. "Yes. Moving somewhere smaller, maybe closer to us. Less to manage, less stress. You'd have us right there if you needed anything." I forced a smile. "I've managed fine here." Judith leaned in, her tone warm but pointed. "But for how much longer?" That question lingered in my head long after they left. For how much longer? I was still cooking, cleaning, tending my garden, paying my bills. I wasn't in perfect health, but I wasn't helpless. Still, the way she said it made me wonder if that's how they saw me, like a problem waiting to happen. The next week, Gregory asked to see my bank statements. "It's just to make sure nothing unusual is happening," he explained, sliding the folder toward me. "So many scams target seniors. You wouldn't even know until it's too late." "I read my own statements," I told him. "Of course," he said quickly, "but it wouldn't hurt to have a second set of eyes." I refused, politely but firmly. He let it drop, but the way he sighed told me he wasn't finished. I noticed a pattern forming. No matter how the visit started, talk about the kids, the weather, the church, they always circled back to money, my bills, my savings, the value of my house. One afternoon, Judith brought over a real estate flyer. "Look at this condo complex near us," she said, sliding the glossy paper across the table. 2 bedrooms, elevators, no yard work. Perfect for someone your age. I didn't even glance at it. "I like my yard work," I replied. She smiled sweetly. "That's what you say now, but one fall on those steps could change everything." Her words were dressed up like concern, but the message underneath was sharp. It unsettled me. I'd lived in that house for decades without incident, but suddenly they spoke as if danger lurked in every corner. I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just overprotective. Maybe they worried more than they should. But something about their persistence felt different. It wasn't just love or concern, it was pressure. Gregory's questions about my health grew more frequent too. "Are you keeping up with your doctor visits? How's your memory these days? Do you ever get confused with your medications?" The first time he asked about confusion, I laughed. "Gregory, I've been taking these pills for years. I know exactly what's what." He didn't laugh back. He just made a note on his phone. That unsettled me more than his questions. Why was he writing things down? One evening, after another round of suggestions about moving closer to them, I asked, "Why does this matter so much to you?" "I'm fine here." Gregory exchanged a look with Judith before answering. "Mum, we just don't want you struggling later. We'd rather plan now than be caught off guard." It sounded reasonable on the surface, but the way they both watched me made me feel like I was on trial. After they left that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. Their words echoed in my head. "You're not getting any younger. Less to manage. What if something happens?" I knew age brings changes. I wasn't blind to that. But their constant reminders felt less like support and more like persuasion, as if they were building a case. I couldn't shake the unease. Concern was one thing, but this felt like something else, something deeper. They didn't see me as Harriet Evans, a capable woman living her life. They saw me as a fragile old lady in need of rescuing, or worse, managing. That realization was like a knot forming in my stomach. And I had the sinking feeling that what started as gentle suggestions was only the beginning. The first real warning came on a Tuesday afternoon when Gregory showed up at my house carrying a manila folder. He didn't bring coffee or groceries this time. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a stack of papers, and spread them in front of me like a salesman. "Mum," he began, sliding one across the table, "you wouldn't believe the articles I've been reading. Seniors losing everything because of one mistake. People forgetting to pay a tax bill, signing the wrong form, or trusting the wrong person. It's happening all the time." I looked at the pages. They were printouts from websites, some with headlines in bold letters. Elderly woman scammed out of savings. Couple loses home after simple error. I skimmed one and noticed the story was from another state, a situation nothing like mine. I pushed the paper back toward him. "Gregory, I've been paying bills and handling money for decades. I'm not going to forget how to write a check." He leaned forward, his voice calm but insistent. "That's just it, Mom. Nobody thinks it will happen to them. That's how people get taken advantage of. I just don't want you to end up in a mess." Before I could respond, Judith walked in with a soft smile and set her purse on the counter. She had clearly rehearsed her part, because without missing a beat, she said, "You don't want to be a burden, do you, Harriet?" The word burden stung. I hadn't asked them for help. I cooked my own meals, drove myself to appointments, and managed every part of my life. Why would she even suggest such a thing? "I am not a burden," I answered, my voice sharper than I intended. Judith raised her hand slightly like she was calming me down. "Of course not. But one wrong move and suddenly Gregory and I would have to step in. Wouldn't it be better to plan ahead so nobody has to scramble later?" Gregory took that as his cue. He opened the folder again and pulled out a different stack of papers, neatly clipped together. He slid them toward me, tapping the top page. "This is just a precaution," he said. "Power of attorney. It gives us the ability to step in if something happens. Nothing changes unless it's needed." I picked up the first page and began reading. The words were full of legal terms, but even with my basic knowledge, I could tell these papers weren't harmless. They weren't about helping if something happened. They gave Gregory and Judith control over everything. My accounts, my house, even medical choices. I set the papers down. If this is really necessary, I'll have my attorney look it over first. The room went cold. Gregory's jaw tightened, and Judith's smile dropped. "Mum," Gregory said slowly, "do you think we put anything in front of you that wasn't safe? We're your family." "I know that," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "But if I'm signing legal documents, I want my lawyer to read them. That's just common sense." Judith's eyes narrowed for the briefest second before she forced another smile. "Lawyers cost money. These are standard forms. Everybody uses them." "Then there won't be any problem with me having mine take a look," I said. Gregory leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He didn't say another word, but the tension in his face told me everything. They weren't expecting resistance. After they left that evening, I sat alone at the table with my tea. The papers were still there, untouched. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Concern was one thing. Pushing me to sign over my rights without proper review was another. That night, I pulled out a notebook I kept in the drawer near the phone. I had always used it for grocery lists and church notes, but I turned to a blank page and wrote at the top, "Gregory and Judith Conversations." I listed the date and wrote down exactly what happened. The articles about seniors losing money, Judith's comment about being a burden, and the power of attorney papers they wanted me to sign. I noted how upset they became when I mentioned my lawyer. It might have seemed excessive, but something told me I needed a record. If their concern was genuine, then no harm was done in keeping track. But if it wasn't, I'd have proof of what was happening. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about keeping me safe. They were laying groundwork. Gregory with his scare stories, Judith with her gentle but cutting remarks, and now the legal papers. It was like they were building a case to convince me I couldn't handle my own life. That realization made my chest tighten. I had trusted Gregory all my life. I raised him, fed him, taught him right from wrong. And Judith? I welcomed her into my family with open arms. Yet here I was, writing down their words like I was protecting myself from strangers. I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer. I told myself I would not be pressured. If they wanted me to sign anything, they would have to wait for my lawyer's approval. But in my heart, I knew this was only the first step. Don't let this be the last step for you. Share this video with another woman who might need the warning. And if you think it's too dramatic to share, say so in the comments. I promise, you'll find plenty of others who disagree with you. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of pressure. It wasn't the open talk about papers anymore. It was smaller things, little moments that made me doubt myself. It began with my pill box. I've taken the same prescriptions for years. Every Sunday evening I set out the week's medicine, blood pressure, cholesterol, vitamins. I've done it so long it's second nature. One morning I opened the box for Tuesday and noticed the pills didn't match what I normally saw. The vitamin was missing, and the blood pressure pill was in the wrong slot. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I had made a mistake. I was sure I hadn't. Still, I fixed it and went on with my day. That afternoon, Judith stopped by. She walked into the kitchen, glanced at the counter, and immediately picked up the pill box. "Harriet," she said with a sigh, "this is exactly what we're worried about. Tuesday's pills aren't right. You could have taken the wrong dose." I told her I hadn't mixed them up. I explained I set them every Sunday and never had an issue. But she shook her head like she didn't believe me. "These things happen," she said in a soft, patient voice. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, but this is how accidents start." The way she spoke made my stomach twist. She didn't sound like she was helping. She sounded like she was keeping a scorecard. Then came the forgotten family dinner. Gregory called me on a Friday evening. "Mum, you missed dinner with us last night. The kids were disappointed." I froze. "What dinner? You never invited me." "Of course we did," he said quickly. "Judith mentioned it when she stopped by last week." I thought back carefully. Judith had stopped by, yes, but she hadn't said a word about dinner. I told him that. Gregory gave a small laugh, but there wasn't any humour in it. "Mum, maybe you just don't remember. It's been a lot lately." I wanted to argue, but I stopped. The seed of doubt had already been planted. What if she had mentioned it and I just didn't hear? What if I was slipping in ways I didn't notice? The worst part came at church. I've been part of the same congregation for decades. People there know me, know my routines. One Sunday after service, I overheard two women near the coffee table whispering. "Poor Harriet," one said. "I heard she's been a little forgetful. Judith told me she worries about her." The other nodded. "Gregory said she's not keeping up with things the way she used to. It's such a shame." I walked past them without a word, but my cheeks burned. I had never felt embarrassed in that church before. Now, I felt like every glance my way was filled with pity. That afternoon, I sat in my living room, staring at the cross-stitch on the wall that Thomas's mother made years ago. My thoughts kept circling. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I did mix up the pills. But then I looked at my checkbook on the coffee table. The balance was perfect, down to the penny. My bills were paid. My fridge was stocked. I was managing everything just as I always had. So why did I feel like I was losing control? Because they wanted me to feel that way. I realized their words and actions weren't random. Judith pointing out the pillbox. Gregory insisting I missed a dinner that never happened. The whispers at church that traced straight back to them. It was all connected. A picture was being painted of me, one brushstroke at a time. Still, even knowing that, I couldn't shake the worry. What if they were right, and I just couldn't see it? I started checking things twice, sometimes 3 times. Was the stove off? Did I lock the door? Did I really write down the correct date for my doctor's appointment? One evening, after pacing the house making sure everything was in order, I sat at the table and opened my notebook. I wrote down every detail: the pillbox, the so-called dinner, the whispers at church. Seeing the words on paper steadied me. It reminded me these weren't mistakes I had made. These were things happening around me. And there was a difference. I closed the book and said out loud to the empty room, "I am not losing my mind." But the doubt had already done its damage. I found myself second-guessing things I once did with ease. And that was exactly what Gregory and Judith wanted. If I doubted myself, I'd be more likely to hand over control. Looking back now, I can see that was the heart of their plan. Not to take everything at once, but to chip away slowly until I believed I couldn't stand on my own. That night, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't give in to the picture they were painting. I knew who I was. I just had to hold on to that truth, even if they tried to convince me otherwise. After weeks of doubt, I knew I couldn't sit on it any longer. Every day, Gregory and Judith found a new way to chip at my confidence. The pillbox, the imaginary dinner, the whispers at church, it was all piling up. I wasn't going to wait until they showed up with more papers. That evening, I opened my drawer, pulled out my notebook, and looked at the notes I'd written. The dates, the comments, the small tricks. They were all there. I picked up the phone and called Paul Reynolds, my attorney of nearly 20 years. Paul isn't flashy. He's a steady man close to my age with a calm voice that always reassures me. He handled the paperwork when Thomas died and helped me set up my will. He knows me, and he knows my family. When he answered, I didn't waste time. "Paul, I need you to look at some documents Gregory brought me," I said. "What kind of documents?" he asked. "Power of attorney papers. They want me to sign them." There was a pause on the line. Then his voice grew serious. "Do not sign anything until I see it. Can you bring them in tomorrow?" "Yes," I said quickly. "And Paul, I think this is bigger than just papers." He didn't press me on the phone. "Come in at 10. We'll go over everything." The next morning, I slipped the folder into my purse and drove to his office. I remember gripping the steering wheel harder than usual, telling myself over and over I wasn't crazy. When I walked in, his receptionist greeted me kindly and showed me to his office. Paul stood as I entered. "Harriet, good to see you. Let's have a look." I handed him the folder. He put on his glasses and began reading quietly. 10 minutes passed, the only sound the turning of pages. I watched his face, hoping to see something that would ease my nerves. But the longer he read, the tighter his expression grew. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me. "Harriet, these aren't simple powers of attorney. These documents give Gregory and Judith full control over everything you own. Your bank accounts, your home, even your medical decisions. If you signed this, they could sell your house tomorrow without asking you." My chest tightened. "They said it was just in case. Only if something happened." Paul shook his head. "No. As written, this would take effect immediately. You'd lose your independence the moment you signed." I leaned back in the chair, my throat dry. "So it's not about helping. It's about control," he said plainly. "Harriet, this is exploitation. I've seen it before, and it almost always starts with family. They frame it as concern, but really it's about access to money and assets." I thought about the pillbox, the missed dinner, the gossip. "They've been trying to make me doubt myself," I whispered. "That's common," Paul said. "If they can convince others you're forgetful, it justifies why they need to step in. It's a pattern." I felt both sick and relieved. Sick that my suspicions were right. Relieved that I wasn't imagining it. "What do I do?" I asked. Paul leaned forward, his hands folded. "First, keep documenting everything. Dates, times, exact words, write it all down. Second, don't confront them directly yet. That could make them push harder. And third, we'll take legal steps to protect you. Keep your finances separate. Don't add them to any accounts. Don't sign anything without me reviewing it." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it all. "So I'm not overreacting?" "Not at all," he said firmly. "You're being smart. Too many people wait until it's too late. You came to me at the right time." His words steadied me. For weeks, Gregory and Judith had chipped away at my confidence. But in that office, hearing Paul call it what it was, exploitation, I felt stronger. We spent another half hour going over practical steps. He suggested I update my will, make sure all my titles and deeds were secure, and consider setting up a trust to protect my assets. He explained that by acting now, while I was clearly competent, I could block any attempt they might make to claim I wasn't. When I left his office, I clutched his card in my hand like it was a lifeline. I walked to my car and sat for a long moment, breathing slowly. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't confused. I wasn't old and incapable. I was a woman protecting herself. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote in my notebook again. I added Paul's advice. Document everything. Keep finances separate. Don't confront yet. I underlined the last part twice. It wasn't easy. I'm not someone who hides from my own child. But I trusted Paul. If waiting and documenting was the best way, I would do it. I closed the notebook and looked around my house. My house. My garden, my pictures, my life. They weren't going to take it from me. I didn't know how far Gregory and Judith would go, but now I had someone in my corner, and I was ready to fight back, quietly, carefully, and on my own terms. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Gregory and Judith pulled into my driveway. I wasn't expecting them. My plan had been to enjoy a quiet breakfast on the porch and later tend to my roses. Instead, their silver SUV parked at the curb, and moments later they walked up carrying a paper bag from the bakery. "Mum," Gregory said brightly as he stepped through the door without waiting for an invitation. "We brought bagels, thought we'd have breakfast together." Judith followed close behind, setting the bag on the counter. "Your favourite, Harriet. Cinnamon raisin. Fresh this morning." I gave them both a polite smile. Something in my gut told me they weren't here just to share bagels. People don't show up unannounced with forced cheer unless they're trying to soften something else. We sat at the table, and Judith began slicing the bagels while Gregory poured coffee. I noticed he had a leather folder tucked under his arm. He didn't open it right away, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. We made small talk for a few minutes. The children's school projects, the weather, even a story about their neighbour's dog. But as soon as our plates were set, Gregory cleared his throat and placed the folder on the table. "Mum, we brought something important," he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes were steady on me. "It's about your accounts." Judith slid into the chair across from me, folding her hands neatly. "This isn't like last time," she assured me. "We know you didn't want to sign those papers without a lawyer, so we simplified everything." Gregory opened the folder and spread out a new set of documents. "These are banking forms to add us as backup signers. Nothing complicated. It just means if something happens, we can step in and help pay bills. You'd still be in charge." I looked at the first page. The heading read, "Joint Account Authorization." My stomach tightened. I wasn't a lawyer, but even I knew what joint access meant. They could take money out without my knowledge. They could move funds, close accounts, or drain savings, all while claiming it was for my benefit. I set the paper back on the table. "These aren't backup forms," I said quietly. "These make you joint account holders." Gregory smiled like I had misunderstood. "Mum, it's just wording. The bank requires this format. You'd still control everything." Judith leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Think of it like insurance, Harriet. You'd have peace of mind knowing we can handle things if you're ever in the hospital." I met her eyes. "I already have online banking. My bills are on autopay. Nothing would fall behind." Gregory's smile faded slightly. "That works now. But what if you had a stroke? What if you couldn't log in? Someone has to step in." The room grew heavier. I could feel their determination pressing against me from both sides. I knew if I refused outright, the tension would boil over. Paul's words from our last meeting echoed in my mind. Don't confront them directly yet. Document everything. So I nodded slowly, pretending to consider. "And these need a notary?" I asked. "Yes," Gregory said quickly, relief flashing in his eyes. "We thought ahead. My friend is a notary. He's meeting us at First National in an hour. If we leave soon, we'll be right on time." It was clear they had orchestrated the whole morning. The bagels, the folder, the timing, it was all part of a plan to box me in. I picked up my coffee cup, buying myself a moment. "You arranged all this without asking me first?" Judith's smile was tight. "We just wanted to make it easy for you, less hassle. You don't need to overthink it." Overthink it. That was her way of saying I shouldn't question them. I set the cup down and folded my hands. "All right," I said calmly. "Let's go." They both looked surprised at how quickly I agreed. Gregory's shoulders eased, and Judith gave a small smile of victory. They thought they had won. But inside, I repeated the words to myself. If they wanted a show, they were about to get one. As they gathered the papers, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. I opened my drawer and slipped my notebook into my purse. I also tucked in a folded piece of paper I had prepared days earlier, just in case, just as I had when I visited Paul. When I returned, Gregory was already by the door, jangling his keys. "We'll drive. That way we can go straight to the notary's office." I locked the house behind me, watching Judith's satisfied smile as she walked toward the SUV. In her mind, this was the day I handed them the keys to everything I owned. But I knew better. The ride to the bank felt strange. Gregory chatted about the kids' soccer game as if nothing serious was about to happen. Judith scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing at me with that same polished smile. I sat in the back seat, my notebook heavy in my purse. My heart beat steadily, not out of fear, but out of resolve. When we pulled into the parking lot of First National, I looked at the brick building and felt a calm determination. They thought they had cornered me, but what they didn't realize was that I had been listening, documenting, and preparing all along. As we walked through the glass doors, Gregory placed his hand gently on my elbow, guiding me like I was fragile. Judith walked a step ahead, holding the folder like a prize. The bank manager greeted us, and Gregory quickly introduced the situation. "We're here to add us as backup signers on my mother's accounts," he said smoothly. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was ready to show them I wasn't the helpless woman they wanted me to be. "If you think preparation is power, then subscribing is your way of standing with me. If you don't believe in subscribing, fine, comment and tell me why, but don't stay silent." The air inside the bank was cool, almost too cool compared to the late morning sun outside. Gregory guided me toward the desk at the back where a man in a navy suit sat, adjusting his tie as we approached. "Good morning," he said warmly, standing to shake hands. "I'm Raj Patel, branch manager here. How can I help you today?" Gregory was quick to answer. "We're here to add us, me and my wife, as joint holders on my mother's accounts. She's ready to get this set up." The way he said it, like I had already agreed, made my stomach knot. I stayed quiet, not showing anything on my face. Mr. Patel looked at me directly, not at Gregory. "Mrs. Evans, do you understand that adding joint account holders means these two would have equal access to your money? They could make withdrawals, transfers, even close accounts." I nodded slightly. "I understand." Gregory jumped in before I could say more. "She's fine with that. We've already talked it through. This is just to help her in case something happens." Mr. Patel held up a hand. "I'll need to hear it directly from her, sir. Bank rules." Judith gave a tight smile and rested her hand on my shoulder again, squeezing as though to remind me what answer I was supposed to give. "Harriet knows it's for her protection," she said softly. I glanced at them both, then back at Mr. Patel. My heart was beating fast, but I knew what I had to do. I slipped my hand into my purse and pulled out the folded note I had prepared that morning. My fingers shook just slightly as I placed it on top of the papers. He opened it discreetly, his expression not changing as his eyes scanned the words. "Help. I am being pressured." He slid the paper under a folder and gave the faintest nod. Then he looked back at Gregory and Judith. "Before we finalize anything, I'll need to do a verification step with Mrs. Evans alone. Standard procedure for significant account changes." Gregory frowned. "Why can't we stay? She might need help understanding." Mr. Patel's tone stayed calm, but firm. "Regulations require private confirmation. It'll only take a few minutes." Judith's grip tightened on my shoulder before she finally let go. "We'll be right outside, Harriet, don't worry." As soon as the door closed behind them, the atmosphere shifted. Mr. Patel leaned forward, his voice low. "Mrs. Evans, are you safe?" I let out a shaky breath. "Yes, for now, but they've been pressuring me for weeks. I don't want them added to my accounts." He nodded, sliding the forms aside. "You did the right thing by letting me know. This kind of situation is more common than you might think. We take it seriously." "They've been trying to make me feel like I'm losing my memory," I whispered. "They tell people I'm confused, but I'm not. They brought me here today with a notary already waiting. I didn't agree to any of this." Mr. Patel took notes as I spoke. "I'll flag your account so any unusual activity requires my approval, and I'll record this meeting for documentation. That way, if they try to argue later, we'll have proof." Relief washed over me, but fear still lingered. "They'll be angry if they think I said no." "I understand," he said gently. "We'll go through the motions today so it looks like progress was made. But I'll make sure nothing actually changes without your consent." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. Thank you. I didn't know who would believe me. You're not alone, Mr. Patel said firmly. The bank has a responsibility to protect you. Let me handle this part. He picked up the stack of papers and began flipping through them as though reviewing for signatures. Then he pressed a button on his phone. A small red light blinked at the edge of his desk. Recording started, he said quietly. I nodded, understanding. Every word from here on would be captured. A knock sounded at the door. Gregory's voice followed. Is everything okay in there? Mr. Patel called back, his tone smooth. All good, just completing verification. We'll be done shortly. He looked at me again. Mrs. Evans, when they come back in, I'll ask you one more time if you want to proceed. You can answer yes so we don't raise suspicion. I'll handle the rest. My hands trembled in my lap. All right. When Gregory and Judith stepped back inside, both looked tense. Gregory checked his watch, clearly eager to move on to the notary. Mr. Patel smiled politely. Thank you for waiting. Everything appears in order. Mrs. Evans, do you still want to add your son and daughter-in-law as joint holders? I glanced at Gregory's expectant face, at Judith's sharp eyes, and then back at Mr. Patel. Yes, I said, keeping my voice steady. Let's get it over with. Gregory's shoulders relaxed. See, I told you she wanted this. Judith let out a little laugh. Finally. This will make life so much simpler. But as they celebrated their supposed victory, Mr. Patel discreetly positioned his phone so the recording would capture every word, every gesture, even Gregory's hand gripping my shoulder again as he smiled for the camera. When the notary entered, Mr. Patel continued to play along. He allowed the signatures but stamped everything with an internal flag. Every form would now require his approval for any transaction, and every detail was noted in the system as signed under duress. By the time we walked out of that office, Gregory and Judith were practically beaming. They thought they had won. They thought the money, the house, and my independence were now in their grasp. But tucked safely in Mr. Patel's files was my note, the recording, and the first official report of financial coercion. Evidence had quietly begun to build. I walked beside them through the lobby, my face calm, my purse steady on my shoulder. Inside, I carried a different feeling, resolve. They didn't know it yet, but this wasn't their victory. This was the beginning of mine. When we left the bank that day, Gregory was smiling like a man who had just closed the best deal of his life. He clapped me on the back, as if I were a child who had finally learned her lesson. See, Mum? That wasn't so hard, he said. Now you won't have to worry about a thing. We'll handle everything from here. Judith chimed in as we walked to the parking lot. You'll thank us later, Harriet. This is the right decision. Much safer for you. I didn't answer. I just slid into the back seat of their SUV, holding my purse close. They drove home chatting about how much simpler life would be now, how the accounts would run smoothly, how Mum can finally relax. But I wasn't relaxing. I was planning. The moment they dropped me off, I went inside, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady as I dialed Paul Reynolds' office. When he answered, I didn't bother with small talk. They took me to the bank, I said firmly. They pushed me into signing joint account papers, but the manager knows what's going on. He has a copy of my note and a recording. We need to act fast. Paul's tone sharpened. I told you this might happen. Listen, Harriet, we're moving quickly now. I'll draft the documents we need this afternoon. First step, freeze anything they can touch. Second, restraining order. I'll call Mr. Patel myself. That night I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the house made me wonder if Gregory would show up again with more demands. I kept reminding myself of Paul's words. You're not powerless. You're protecting yourself. 2 days later, my fears proved right. I logged into my online banking and saw a large withdrawal I hadn't made. $20,000 was gone, labelled Community Living Deposit. My chest burned as I stared at the screen. They were already moving me, on paper at least, into a retirement facility I had never agreed to. I called Paul immediately. They've taken money without permission. He didn't hesitate. We have them now. Get dressed, Harriet. We're going to the courthouse this morning. At the courthouse, Paul filed for an emergency restraining order. He explained to the clerk and later to a judge that I had been pressured, that funds were taken, that evidence was recorded at the bank. The judge granted the order on the spot. Gregory and Judith were barred from accessing my accounts or making decisions on my behalf until a full hearing. The next stop was First National. Mr. Patel met us in his office, a serious look on his face. "I've already flagged the accounts," he said. "The withdrawal went through before the flag caught it, but now everything is locked until further notice. I also filed a report with our Elder Financial Abuse Division." I thanked him, my voice breaking slightly. "If it weren't for you, I'd already be trapped." He shook his head. "You saved yourself, Mrs. Evans. I just followed the signs you gave me." That Friday, Paul arranged a formal meeting at the bank. Gregory and Judith were summoned. A police officer was present, along with Mr. Patel and myself. I sat at the long table, notebook open in front of me, as the door swung open and they entered. Gregory looked annoyed. "What is this? Why are we here?" Paul spoke calmly. "This is a review of account activity. Mrs. Evans has raised concerns." Judith crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "Concerns? We were just trying to help. This is ridiculous." Mr. Patel pressed a button on a small device. "This meeting is being recorded. Let's be clear. A joint account was opened under duress. Funds were withdrawn for a retirement facility without Mrs. Evans' consent." Gregory's face reddened. "That's not true. She agreed. She said yes." Paul slid a folder across the table. Inside was a transcript of my note, copies of Mr. Patel's report, and still frames from the recording that showed Gregory gripping my shoulder while I signed. "Actually," Paul said evenly, "we have documented proof that she was pressured. Your actions meet the legal definition of financial exploitation." The police officer leaned forward, his voice steady. "In Virginia, financial exploitation of an elder is a crime. This case qualifies." Judith's voice cracked. "We're her family. We were protecting her." I finally spoke, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Protecting me? You took $20,000 from my account and called it a deposit for a place I never agreed to live in. You tell people I'm forgetful. You move my pills. You invent dinners I was never invited to. That's not protection, that's control." Gregory tried to interrupt. "Mom, no," I said firmly, cutting him off. "You listen to me now. I am not your responsibility. I am your mother, not your property." The room fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then the officer spoke again. "Here's what's going to happen. The funds will be returned. The accounts remain frozen until the court finalizes protective orders. Any further attempts to access money or interfere with Mrs. Evans's property could result in criminal charges." Gregory sank back in his chair, his bravado gone. Judith stared at the table, her hands clenched. I closed my notebook and stood. My legs felt strong beneath me. "This ends now. You don't get to decide my life for me. I've managed it for 68 years and I will continue to do so." Paul gathered the documents. Mr. Patel stopped the recorder, and the officer escorted Gregory and Judith out. When the door shut behind them, I let out a long breath. For the first time in months, I felt free. Not just free of their pressure, but free of the doubt they had planted in my mind. As we walked out of the bank together, Paul looked at me with a faint smile. "You did well, Harriet. You stood your ground." I nodded, gripping my purse close. They underestimated me. They thought I was weak. But I'm not. I never was. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, I opened my notebook one last time. I wrote the words clearly at the bottom of the page. "I am not a burden. I am not confused. I am not theirs to manage." And for the first time in a long while, I believed every word. If believing in yourself matters to you, prove it by liking this video. If you think believing doesn't matter, say so in the comments. But don't just watch quietly. say something. After the confrontation at the bank, the house felt different. It wasn't that the walls had changed or the rooms looked new. It was the air inside. For the first time in months, I could breathe without a knot in my chest. The silence was mine again, not filled with doubts that Gregory and Judith had planted. Paul and I met several more times in the weeks that followed. He helped me set up a trust that placed my assets under clear protection. My accounts were secured with safeguards that required independent oversight. My will was updated, not to favour or punish anyone, but simply to reflect my wishes. It gave me peace knowing everything was documented while my mind was sharp and steady. At church, I opened up to a few trusted friends. I expected shock, maybe even pity, but what I heard instead was story after story that sounded painfully familiar. One friend told me her daughter had pressured her to sell her home and move into a retirement village she didn't want. Another woman shared how her nephew had borrowed money that was never returned. A man in the group said his own son had drained an account under the excuse of helping with bills. The more I listened, the clearer it became. What I had gone through wasn't rare. It was happening to others quietly, behind closed doors. That realization gave me both sadness and strength. Sadness that so many of us carried these burdens, but strength because I knew I wasn't alone. I found myself more open during our weekly coffee gatherings. Sometimes protecting yourself means saying no, I told them one morning. Even if the person you're saying no to is your own child. Heads nodded around the table. There was no judgment, only understanding. In the middle of all this, Gregory called. His voice was hesitant, unlike the confidence he always carried before. "Mum, I know you're angry, but Judith and we thought we were doing what was best." I listened, silent. He went on. "We didn't mean to hurt you. Can we just talk? Maybe start fresh?" When he finished, I spoke calmly. "Gregory, you and Judith made choices. You told people I was confused. You took money without asking. That wasn't protecting me. That was taking from me. I won't pretend it didn't happen." He sighed. "We're sorry." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to grab onto those words to believe they meant something. But I knew better. Apologies without changed behaviour are just words. "I'll always love you because you're my son," I finally said. "But loving you doesn't mean I have to let you control me. If you want to be in my life, it will be on my terms." We ended the call without resolution. A week later, Judith sent a letter. She wrote that they had acted out of fear, that they worried about me being alone, that they had let that fear turn into pressure. She asked for forgiveness. I folded the letter and placed it in my notebook, with all the other entries I had kept. It wasn't that I dismissed her words, but I knew forgiveness doesn't erase boundaries. If they wanted back into my life, they would have to prove through actions that they understood where the lines were now drawn. My days slowly returned to what they once were. I spent mornings in my garden again, afternoons helping at the pantry, evenings with friends from church. Every so often, a memory of what had happened would surface, but instead of breaking me down, it reminded me of the strength I had found when I needed it most. I no longer second-guessed myself when I locked the doors or set out my pills. I no longer wondered if I had really heard an invitation or simply forgotten. I knew the truth. I had been clear all along. It was Gregory and Judith who tried to blur the lines. What I carry now is not bitterness, but clarity. I know where I stand. I know what I will and will not allow. That clarity is a kind of peace I didn't expect to find at this stage of life. Looking back, I realize that love and control are not the same. Love respects, love supports, control takes, disguising itself as care. My son and his wife confused the two, and for a while they almost convinced me to confuse them too. But I won't make that mistake again. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Your dignity matters. Your independence matters. You don't stop being capable the day you turn 65 or 70 or 80. Age doesn't erase wisdom. Age doesn't erase worth. Sometimes protecting yourself means saying no, even when the person asking is your own child. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to write down the truth, hold firm, and let people be uncomfortable with the word no. I've learned that setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out forever. It means opening the door only when they're willing to come in respectfully. My door is still open to Gregory, but not to control, not to manipulation, not to pressure, only to love, if he ever chooses to bring it back. Now, as I sit on my porch in the evening light, tea in hand, I feel peace. The garden is blooming. The house is quiet. And I know without question that my life is still mine. And now I want to ask you, the one listening to my story, have you ever been pressured by someone who claimed it was for your own good? Did someone try to take decisions away from you in the name of care? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. You might be surprised how many people out there have lived through something similar. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who might need to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story. Together, we can keep lifting each other up. Lastly, our best-selling audiobook, Healthy Boundaries. After 60, How to Set Strong Boundaries. Say no with grace, protect your peace, and strengthen your relationship.